Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the gender pay gap. There's a left-leaning federal government in Australia, and so they're pushing as hard as they can on all the gender division, racial division, stirring up hatred between the genders and the races and so on. And the latest on this is a recent alleged, and I use the term alleged, study that asserts that there is a huge gender pay gap. And it's, well, depending on whose numbers you look at, it's running at about 23%. Or they claim about $26,000 a year in income between the genders. So they're alleging that, if men are paid $100,000 a year, women are paid $74,000 a year for, and given the way it's worded, for exactly the same work. So you look at, well, that's outrageous. That is outrageous. For exactly the same work, exactly the same amount of hours at work, women are paid $26,000 a year less. This is a fucking outrage. Only a nation of fucking Nazis would allow this to happen. So we have to do something about it. A bit like climate change. The Nazis, we got to fight back against these fucking fascists. So now everyone, anyone in the know knows that there is no gender pay gap. There are different employment choices that people make. And given the various statistical ways they have of calculating what the difference in pay is, then they can come up with a gender pay gap that bears no resemblance to any known reality. It's this typical world of fantasy where climate change and race, there's racism everywhere and misogyny everywhere. It's the same sort of people that produce that propaganda are producing this. So there's a few statistical tricks they use. Firstly, is they don't count overtime and the effect working overtime has, particularly in various factory work and other work where overtime can play quite a large component. So rather than hire new people or have to skill up different people in different areas, a lot of manufacturing companies will instead say to workers, instead of working, for example, 40 hours a week, say, look, can you work 48 hours this week and do such and such or so and so. And you see it in the heavier manual labour jobs where there's more men. This could be things like forklift drivers and people on building sites and so on, crane drivers and the like. So these are jobs where there are very, very few women, either in those professions or who are interested in doing them. They statistically they don't say, well, look, this is the overtime component that creates a difference. So they don't count the different sorts of employment, different job roles that women choose, or overtime. Then they add in another statistical trick here where they say that every woman will take an average of 6 weeks off a year to look after children, as in new children, children just been born. So they then just simply deduct 6 weeks' pay from a woman's pay and say, well, she's not getting paid for that 6 weeks. Now, given the amount of women who have children and how low, most of them are in, not all, but most of them are in low-paid jobs anyway, like casual workers in sandwich shops and so on, particularly given that the overwhelming number of new births are to recent illiterate peasant migrants from the third world. By taking off 6 weeks' pay from, they're assuming a white middle class woman making, being paid at the upper end of the experience range. So they make assumption. I mean, this is irritating. That they make an assumption that the woman is an experienced worker being paid 1.5 times the average wage.
Then they assume that the woman is taking 6 weeks off for child care of a newborn child. Now, the average age of white women in that pay category is they're past the childbearing age, so they're not going to be having children. So this statistical trick they're using is they're going to the higher income and saying, well, 6 weeks payoff there, and then they're not including overtime. They're saying the men are being paid that extra amount of money, not because it's overtime, but just somehow it's magically falling into their pay packet. They're looking at these differentials and saying, well, there you go, gender pay gap. That's it. So through misstatements and through failure to categorise certain pay categories, such as overtime, and by making arbitrary deductions for a situation that doesn't exist, most of the women in that category who are on that wage, the average age is 44, so they're not going to be having children at that age, or would be so rare as to be irrelevant. But yet they're taking out $10,000 or $12,000 a year from the woman's pay packet and saying, well, she's on leave and she's not getting maternity allowance, she's not getting maternity pay, therefore we'll just take $12,000 out of the pay packet. Then by the time we do another calculation to ignore overtime and say that men are getting it unreasonably or unfairly, or it's a demonstration of a pay gap, then we can come up with $26,000 a year. This, of course, is utter nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. And the people in the body politic and all the public servants involved, they know it's absolute rubbish. Yet they push it and tout as if there's some major social disaster here. There's serious social problems, and it's caused by fucking Nazis. And we have to do something, drama, disaster, climate change. And so there are these endless array of social problems that are invented. They don't exist. Now, it's the law in Australia, as it is I think in any Western country, certainly in Australia and places like Britain, the United States, that people have to be paid the same rate of pay for the same job. Now, the same job doesn't involve the same work. For example, in many manual labour type jobs, if a woman is employed, it's not usually many women employed. If a woman is employed, then she only has to lift, I think it's 20 pounds of weight maximum, whereas the man has to lift 35 pounds of weight. So it's not the same work for the same pay. The woman gets the same pay, but does not have to do the same work. So there are those sorts of things. But regardless, in each category of pay, and in every piece of legislation, it's mandated everybody has to be paid the same if they're in that classification of jobs. So people are paid the same. This idea that men are paid differently, or 26,000 a year more than women, that's absolute nonsense. It's a complete and total fabrication and falsehood, but yet they keep on pushing it relentlessly, again coming up with these bullshit statistics and alleged evidence. And this does the rounds in high schools, where girls are told, there you are, these evil boys are getting paid more than you, and this is an outrage. It's a travesty. And you girls, you go out there, and when you haven't got time to parade around with placards for climate change, go and parade around for this. Become full-time activists for these social problems that just don't exist. And looking at the headline newspapers, particularly the left-leaning newspapers, there's got the screaming headlines that we've got these terrible, they're leading at front page news. We're leading these societal problems that we have that have to be dealt with, and isn't it terrible, and end of the universe, and so on. Women are oppressed, and then there's stories about the patriarchy and misogyny. And Billie Jean was grabbed in the ass 50 times yesterday, then raped, and was then denied a promotion, and was then these so-called human interest stories, which are invented and fabricated. The person doesn't even exist, that they're talking about. But nonetheless, they're these are things that are going on now. Any look at a gender pay gap, and if you do any independent hard work, and look at first, if you look at the people that are pushing this propaganda, and they're paid to create their job, and some of them are paid very well to do it. 3, 4, 500,000 a year. Their job is to run around telling whopper lies, that there's these huge social problems, gender conflict and racial conflict and so on. And that's what they do. They are paid to do that. They're not paid to come out with facts. Now, for any sober person that looks at it, so well, okay, women are making different choices, and I know from my own experience, in in being a VP and so on, a CEO, is that when you want people to stay back to do, something has happened, and you go, well, we've got to jump all over this. You don't get the women are much more reluctant to stay back. And if you ask the team, you'd be lucky if even one woman will stay for a couple of hours. And if she does stay, she'll wait until the senior manager has gone for the day, and then she'll give herself a leave pass, or she'll say, "Well, I'll stay, but you have to give me a taxi fare home because I'm too frightened that bad men may come and try and grab my ass on the way home. If it's after a certain time, so you have to give me a taxi fare." And she lives out. So, well, that's going to be a $500 taxi fare. Well, I have to so I can feel safe. Or you don't want to give me the taxi fare? Oh, well, it's all right. I'll go then. If you don't want me to stay, that's fine. So you get those sorts of silly tricks that are going on. But it's really only men that stay back. Occasionally you'll find some women who will, but it's very rare. So when it comes to things like overtime and promotions and so on, and I've promoted or I've gone to women and say, look, you're doing a pretty good job, Billie Jean. Would you like to be promoted to an operations director or something? And then Billie Jean will start telling me, well, actually, that I've noticed that involves staying back till such and such a time to do this and that, and I don't want the stress, I don't want the worry, and I go out partying on Friday night. I don't want anything to interfere with that, and they'll come out with the weirdest things, and say that they don't really want it. That they'll only take the job provided they don't have to work as hard as either the position requires or as hard as their male colleagues do. So I'm quite sort of strict on that. So no, if you're going to take the job, you have to do it and be responsible for it. And if you don't want it, and if you don't want to do that job, then I guess that's fine. But I think you're turning down an opportunity. Now, those same women, of course, the very next day will complain of misogyny or that they're being denied promotions. But that's not what happened, certainly not by my experience. So women make different choices, the jobs they want, promotions they're prepared to accept. They'll happily take a promotion provided it doesn't involve any additional hard work or responsibility. Or accountability. That's the one thing that I've found most women fear the most: accountability. That seems to send them into states of terror that they're going to be judged, on merit and judged impartially without the emotional factor. They want to be judged on emotions. Can't you see how much I care? That's supposed to matter, not the job I do. So there's that. But there is certainly no gender pay gap. There are difference in promotions and difference in choices and difference in overtimes and things like that. But that's it. And the idea that just arbitrarily deduct from women's pay a presumed childcare amount, whether the woman has children or not, or whether people and women in that category have children or not, that's just utterly absurd, and shows that now if there was a gender pay gap, you wouldn't need to tell lies or engage in these insane statistical manipulations. The facts would speak fully for themselves, straight facts. Here's two people both digging holes in the road. That's their job, and the man is paid $26,000 more for doing exactly the same job. That would be a case of a gender pay gap, no question of it. But that's not what's happening. It's as I say, different career choices and
different desires to have more responsibility and more accountability. Those are things. But I think that's changing. It's certainly every diversity officer and diversity director I've met so far has been a woman. And these jobs pay very, very well. Most diversity officers are paid more than civil engineers with 5 to 7 years experience. So this idea that women are hard done by or uniquely hard done by is completely absurd. The new wave of non-meritorious jobs that are flooding through the Western economies at the moment are heavily favouring women over men, and whatever pay gap one that may exist. Well, no, it doesn't exist, but pay gap in terms of career choices and those sorts of things, and the pay that's associated with that I'm surprised that hasn't shown itself and come up in the numbers of the system already. As I say, every diversity officer I've met's been a woman, and some of these diversity directors and so on at universities, they're paid more than $400,000 a year. So this idea that women are being underpaid, and I haven't seen a single diversity director yet who's been a man, and certainly not a straight man. You've been with Tacitus today at your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.